First, let's look at a static histogram that we might create in RStudio. And spoiler alert, obviously with the Shiny app, we're going to make this dynamic. We're going to make it so that the audience, the person that you're putting the graphic in front of, can change some of the parameters using sliders and drop downs, etc., and the graphic will automatically re-render given this sort of new set of parameters. So, but starting point, we've got a histogram, reasonably boring. Here's the code. Obviously, this comes from the Faithful data set. Faithful, this is I think there's a Old Faithful, it's a geyser somewhere in America, and it erupts every certain amount of time, and there's a waiting time between each of these eruptions. And so what we've got here is on the x-axis, we've got the waiting time, and it's a histogram, so we've got the frequency or how often that waiting time is the case. Simple little histogram, and we can change the bins of the histogram. So, I mean, this is all pretty obvious, but I'll just do it to illustrate what we're trying to do there. And wouldn't it be nice if the person looking at the histogram could change those bins themselves without going into the code? Of course it would. That's what we want. We want our data visualizations to be interactive. We want them to render in response to what it is that give the people what they want, right? So this is where Shiny apps come in. Let's look at how to do that. So on the screen at the moment, we've got the most simple version of a Shiny app. What you're seeing is what we call the user interface, or the UI. And the UI has got two components to it. It's got an input and an output, right? So the input is what we can tweak, and we can move the slider along, and the histogram re-renders with a new number of bins. So super duper easy, uncomplicated. But just remember, there's a few things I want you to remember because it's important for the code. Firstly, we call this the user interface. Secondly, we've got an input and an output, okay, because that all becomes important as we build our Shiny app in the code. The other thing I want you to just quickly be aware of is outside of the user interface, so a person interacts with the user interface and they might move the slider along. That information goes somewhere, and then the graphic is re-rendered, and then that graphic comes back. And by the way, it doesn't have to be a histogram or a plot. It could be a table, it could be text, it could be all sorts of things. But the point is, there's this back and forth in the user user interface. The user, the person doing this, does something. Information gets sent to what we call the server, and that's basically R. The server does something and sends something back to the user interface, which is now the output, right? So there's an input and there's an output, and in between these two, there's a server, okay? And all of that is important if you want to understand how the sort of structure of the code looks. So let's jump right into that. Right, so here's the code. And before I get into the nuts and bolts of the code, there's a couple of things to point out. First of all, you've got to call the library Shiny. Okay, so Shiny is a package, library Shiny.